even though it's a small meeting, not that many of us here. Thank you for coming. If we start off with the agenda, as it is 5 o'clock then, the minutes, to confirm the minutes of the meeting which took place on the 1st of July, and it was laid on the table 30 minutes before the meeting. Do we agree with those minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. Apologies for absence, and I believe we have one or two.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got apologies from Councillor Paul Follows and Penny Marriott.
Thank you. Have we received any disclosures of interest?
None, Chairman.
Thank you. Have we any questions by members of the public?
None, Chairman.
And following that, of course, have we any questions from members of the council?
None, Chairman.
Oh, that's a good start, isn't it? There we are. Okay, so we come to the main items. Sorry. Councillor.
Excuse me, Chairman. It's a question that's only arisen just because we've arrived and found that this paper's lying on the desk, which we hadn't seen before. So I'm surprised that, you know, we haven't had any notice of the content of this document.
So, Chairman, if I may, it's copies of just excerpts from the Constitution highlighted. So it's elements in the Constitution that relate to item 6. So it's not a formal paper, not part of the agenda pack, but I thought it would be helpful if members wanted to refer to those elements of the Constitution.
Does that answer your question, okay? Yes, thank you. So then on to item 6, Council Procedure Rules. This is the main bulk, obviously, of the discussions tonight. Council Procedure Rules is set out in Part 4 of Waverley's Constitution. So as I understand it, then this is clarification, that paper you have in front of you, of the rules that we're talking about tonight. The Standards Committee are invited to consider the following proposals that have been put forward by the Leader and Deputy Leader as portfolio holders for policy and governments. Unfortunately, the Deputy Leader is ill tonight, so he won't be attending. So we'll take these items one by one, please. So first of all then, we have member conduct, removal of the requirement to stand to speak at full council. I think it's a fairly obvious statement. So can I have questions, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not in favour of removing this requirement for one or maybe two good reasons. The main reason is that the Mayor, when she or he is chairing a full council meeting, is the Queen's representative as Mayor, and it is only right that that respect should be recorded, and that therefore we should continue to stand to speak, unless it's a council meeting that's informal council meeting when we're not in public, so to speak. But that's why we speak at full council and we don't stand, that's why we stand at full council and we don't stand at any other meeting. I also think that it's, you know, standards should be preserved in this council, and standing to speak does keep those standards, in the same way as I have views about dress at council meetings. Certainly at full council and at most meetings, I think a jacket and tie are a prerequisite. It's not in our standing orders, but I think it is something which shows respect for the council that we serve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to echo those remarks. I think it's important when you're addressing council that there is some form of formality in it. Standing in there just gets you prepared, gets you stand. People see who it is, people in the gallery, and also with so many new members, people in the chamber. And to me, although I sometimes have slightly slower than other people in standing, I think it's important. It's important for me to basically get ready to address that council meeting and to show the respect, as Councillor Goodrich said. So I'm very much against relaxing that particular requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to echo the remarks of both of my colleagues there. I think that there is a certain standard Also, it makes it quite easy for anybody who's sat in the gallery when there's 50 odd of us here to see who it is that's speaking, rather than breaking their neck trying to see if there's a red light on somewhere to give it away. And I'd also echo Councillor Goodridge's remarks about the standard of dress at some meetings. When, as chairman of licensing, we sit and do some of the jobs the magistrates used to do, I've had to make it clear that I don't expect members to turn up in jeans and t-shirts. Thank you.
On item 6, apologies, I've forgotten the microphone. We are on item 6 for the standing to speak at full council. I would like...
Thank you. I can understand the wishes of some to make it easier for new councillors, because I think that probably was the intention, that it is quite intimidating for new councillors, and with so many new councillors, you know, comprising probably the majority of this council now, I can understand that. But I do tend to agree with what Councillor Goodridge has just said, that I think we do need the standards. I do agree in respect to the matter of respect for the mayor. And I think that's the main issue here, actually. I don't think there are, you know, other issues really can override that. Happy to listen to other people's views on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody? Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Chairman. The only comment I would make is that standing up and looking down at notes means you see the top of people's heads on the screen. It is not quite set up properly for looking at facial recognition. So sitting down, you're looking more towards the camera.
Thank you. Any other questions? Then I have one myself to make. I too am very worried about this because of the respect. I like respect, and I think that historically, standing does show that respect to both the mayor and the council itself. I would also add that when I do speak and stand, then I myself will be looking at how the council itself, the members, are actually taking those views. So it gives me an indication of what people are saying and thinking. My final point would be for the disabled. There must be a way, surely, of making sure that we can waive the rule for those disabled, because without embarrassing them, I'd hate somebody to have to put their hand up who is disabled to ask if they need to sit down. I'm not sure it's in the rules at the moment. Can I just ask advice on that?
So certainly within the rules at the moment, the mayor's discretion allows the mayor that if a member is unable to stand, the mayor will not require them to stand. So you have two options really. You either put something explicitly within the constitution to say that if a member is unable to stand, then they do not have to, or you can just leave it for the mayor to deal with that at his or her discretion.
I think personally it would be better to put a rule in there, simply because then it doesn't give this embarrassment of a flow of a mayor having to make up their mind. So if I could ask for an amendment on that, would that be the way to go? Councillor Goodridge?
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer to leave it to the mayor's discretion. I think if I got to the situation where I couldn't get up and I knew I would be wanting to speak, I would have a quiet word with the mayor beforehand and say, look, I'm afraid I've just had a new hip or a new knee, I can't stand. Can I have your indulgence not to stand at this meeting? And I would hope the mayor would then say, and Councillor Goodridge, please remain seated when you speak. And then there's no embarrassment for anybody. And, then you have to start, can you stand or can't you stand, and a debate about that. I think I would prefer to leave it to the discretion of the mayor. After all, it's the mayor who we're being respectful to, and if she relieves you from that respect for good reason in her judgment, sort it out beforehand, no problem.
Chairman, just to clarify what the rules say at the moment, under conduct of members standing to speak. Sorry. Just to say that at the moment we don't have anything which explicitly refers to it. Other councils do have that explicit reference within theirs, where, for example, this one comes from where, Fiona? From South Cambridgeshire. Yeah. It says when a member or member of the public speaks at full council, they must stand unless they're disabled from doing so and address the meeting through the chairman. So that's the sort of thing, if you were to put it in, it would go in. However, as Councillor Goodrich says, the other option is you leave it for the discretion of the mayor.
Thank you. Just one other matter where obviously the use of points of personal explanation and points of order, we always have to stand in order to make such points, don't we? And I think we could end up possibly with a situation where almost a free-for-all, where people were able to interject in a meeting without any, just switch the machine on and start speaking, which could possibly become more uncomfortable for the mayor in conducting the council meeting or the chairman in any other meeting. But no, it is not referring to any other meeting anyways, it is only in the council meetings. But I do think there's a difficulty there with the practical implementation of it, because it will feel very informal to people, a lot more informal than we want at council. Thanks.
Sounds sensible. Also, of course, the mayor stands to keep order, and immediately the mayor stands, everybody else sits down. So we need to keep that in as well.
I just wanted to say that when I was chairman of the audit committee, the mayor gave me discretion not to come up to the podium because I take slightly longer than others to do it, and it was at the discretion. And I think that if we go to try and qualify this, how many other things may we have to qualify that can be properly handled by the mayor? So I would be in favour of leaving it to the mayor's discretion, subject to it becoming an issue. And it can come back to the standards committee if there's anything. But I'd worry about putting this in if other people basically come and say, well, can we have clarification on this, or can we have clarification on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other statements or questions from members?
Sorry to come back another time, but I do think that perhaps it might be relevant to this to us whether the mayor has been asked or past mayors what they think or what they would think of this, because I can understand that a lot of new councillors might find it very daunting to speak at council meetings standing up, and as Councillor Peter Marriott has said, there is an issue with when you're standing up and you're speaking and your microphone's no longer in front of you and people can't hear you as well, because then you've got to be looking down. Obviously, normally, if you've got a complicated matter you're speaking on, normally I would have some bullet points that I'd look down to, and I am looking down and it is just the bald top of my head that's showing to the webcast. There are a number of reasons why people wouldn't want to, but it is a lot more daunting for new members. So, you know, there's a possibility, I suppose, a consideration of, well, should we for 6 months or a year trial it in order to see how it works, because maybe we're thinking there's a problem that wouldn't actually happen and that a lot of people would appreciate it, possibly just while the new people spend their first year learning, you know, to get used to the chamber but actually speaking, because we do want to encourage them to speak or they never get used to it. That's the problem that we have for new people. It does take a year or so normally for people to get used to it unless they're already accomplished in some form of public speaking.
The other tech, I don't know whether anybody's approached IT yet to see whether they can alter things a little bit just to tweak it. Do we know if IT have been...
In terms of the camera, the system, we have to set it either for standing or sitting, but we can certainly look at what flexibility there is. Fiona, I don't know if you want to, and then I'll comment on the microphone as well.
We would need to adjust the, well, if everybody was sitting, then we have a template for that. Some councils I've seen have amended their rules to say there's no obligation to stand. That would require a little tweaking of the camera angles if some people were going to be sitting and some people were going to be standing. For example, as Councillor Hyman just stood up to demonstrate the difference, you lost the top of your head on the webcast, and that's just the camera angles. We can accommodate that. The councils that I know have changed their procedure rules to remove the obligation to stand have done so because of the issue with the microphones and the webcasting, and when members are standing and speaking, the gap between them and the microphone means that they're not always picked up on the webcast properly. So it's been, as far as I can gather, it's been largely very practical issues and nothing about sort of wanting to the respect issue, it's not been about disrespecting the mayor or anything like that. It's been purely sort of practical situation.
Chairman, if I may add to that. So the technology allows you to sit or stand, but actually, Councillor Hyman, when you were demonstrating there, actually you moved the microphone up and then we could all hear you very well when you're standing. So from a purely technical point of view, so long as members do use the flexibility in the microphone and move the microphone when they stand or have it in that position already, there's no technical issue there from my perspective. I think really the focus is on whether or not you feel there's other reasons for changing the rule.
Thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise, what I'd like to do is, as I say, split this up. So if we could vote on the item 1, please. Removal of the requirement to stand to speak at full council. All those in favour? All those against? Thank you. That motion. To amend PR 10 to reintroduce informal questions at meetings of full council. Any questions, please?
Chairman, I have no problem with this. We did have informal questions at full council in the past, which is why it says reintroduce. But when we did this in the past, what we did was have the informal question time 1/4 before the meeting started, so it would be at 6:45, for example. And I think the purpose behind that was to ensure that 57 councillors didn't have to sit through questions where they couldn't take part at all and get involved. And then it was timed for 1/4 so that then at 7 o'clock we'd start the proper business. And, you know, where one's concerned that council meetings might end rather late, I think it's important we start on time. So I'm all in favour and doing it the way we did it before, which is a 1/4 question time before the official start of the council meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman, you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. My memory doesn't actually serve me entirely well on this. I know that apart from myself and a number of sort of half a dozen other Farnham residents of Farnham and a lady from Alfold, there aren't that many people who actually do come along and ask questions. There are certain major issues where the public get involved and want to ask questions, want to get answers. Certainly, I think there's. I think as far as Farnham is concerned, having elected people to come and ask the questions in the chamber, there isn't seen to be or perceived to be a need for them to come along and ask those same questions that they can ring us up and ask us to ask here. And so, you know, I don't know the extent to which this will be used. I do recall that the Conservative administration quite intelligently started executive meetings a 1/4 hour early, as you said, at 6:45. We seem to have very flexible times for executive meetings over the past year or 18 months, and certainly under the new administration, they seem to be the executive meetings seem to start at any old time of day, and I can't keep track of that, I'm afraid. I'd like to have a standard time so that the public know what time executive meetings are, certainly, but that's not to do necessarily with this, what's on our agenda here. I was a bit disappointed not to have anything in the agenda paper saying what was actually being proposed, and not to have a proposal of the wording. And I assume the document that I've got here is this the proposed wording? The highlighted yellow is the no. Would somebody explain exactly where we are and what is being proposed, or are we going to start drafting and writing stuff now? Because I have got certainly some thoughts on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. What we were, I think, believing that this would come at the beginning of the session and that there would be a time limit on the number of questions allowed, either 15 or 30 minutes, and a limit on the amount of time an individual would speak, i.e. 3 minutes. And as far as I'm aware, that's the sort of proposal that would go in front. Officer Zappi, can you amplify on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify that Councillor Follows, Leader and Deputy Leader, didn't want to put all of the detail in these proposals. So they are proposals, but it was for the Standards Committee to discuss whether they would be taken forward, and if so, what the detail is. So that is one version that the Chairman has outlined, but you may wish to suggest other versions.
Councillor Knowles?
Thank you very much. Yes, many of the remarks that both Councillor Goodridge made and Councillor Hyman I would go along with, and certainly when I was elected this council, it was 15 minutes from 6:45 to 7 o'clock. And that was when the public questions were. There were rules like if it's been asked in the last 6 months the same or similar questions, it can't be asked again. You can't come to every meeting. And I think this committee needs to see that before we can agree this. This is kind of just throwing a pebble in the pond and see what happens. Well, I don't think that's good enough. We need to know what is being proposed. And I certainly agree with Councillor Goodridge, and I suspect Councillor Hyman. We need to see them a lot more, and I would want it to be before, because if you're even 30 minutes you mentioned, if we were here at 7 o'clock and still doing public questions at 7:30, I can imagine on budget day we'll be here till midnight, and to me that's quite unacceptable.
Councillor Gray?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, in principle, I have no problems with this, but I'm trying to understand what the members of the public are going to get out of it. We're saying potentially 3 minutes. That's one example. That would give us 5, but it wouldn't give any chance at all to respond to that. We're not suggesting, I think, that they give us pre-notice.
No, there isn't on public.
There's no pre-notice, so therefore they won't get a reply to it. They'll just have the opportunity of putting to it. I can't see what the members of the public are going to get out of it. But equally, I don't want to stop members of the public having the opportunity to come and addressing us. I just would like to see the details and to work out what our objective is, so that when we introduce this, we see whether it's actually working. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Adams.
Yes, I don't really see much benefit of this, to be honest. I mean, it did, the key time, obviously, for members of the public to ask questions is at the executive meetings. But I can understand that must be difficult if, as Councillor Hyman's saying, they juggle them around at short notice. I mean, in this document here, which was left on the desk, there are some suggestions as to how, you know, how the public might put their thing. They have to, I think, submit them for at least 4 days in advance.
No, that's written public. That's a question.
Right.
Those are the current rules.
Okay. Well, I think that the written questions for the council is fair enough, because the council meetings are quite far apart. I mean, if the executive, for instance, said we think that question should go to full council, then that's fair enough. But just to have them out of the blue on the few meetings of council we have, which is what, no more than 6 a year, I think is not really very practical.
If I could make a point, this was introduced some while ago by Councillor Slyfield, some 12, 13 years ago, and trialled at that time. And we did find it quite successful. I believe Councillor Hyman was one of those who often asked questions. E Street was something that was very much the fore in those days, and it gave the public the opportunity to address the council. I accept that we didn't always give an answer at the time, however they were always answered afterwards. I believe in honesty and transparency, and I would like to see the public allowed to come and ask questions, or indeed if they wish for those 3 minutes they would make statements. It's the practical way I see of trying to get it incorporated. I accept that half an hour I think would be too long. 15 minutes would be the appropriate time, I believe. It's my belief, not the deputy leaders. And I believe 3 minutes would be the appropriate timing. So for myself, I'd like to see it start at 7, a 15-minute question time, and with 3 minutes to each. I agree with a lot of people. I don't think we'll get that many questions. However, we are giving the public the opportunity, and I think it's very good to demonstrate to the public that this is an open council, and if they wish to come and question us, by all means do so. Ward?
I don't really see the difference between having the question in written form in advance, where proper answers could be given, as against just posing questions where proper answers can't be given, which seems to me a bit of a waste of time. So I don't really see the benefit of it, to be honest, over the existing system.
Okay. Councillor Hyman.
I think the idea of proper answers really goes to the nub of this. In respect to Councillor Adams' reference to the changing, and my own previous reference to the changeable times of the executive, that isn't a criticism of this current administration particularly. It's just a fact of life, and there was in March, prior to the elections under the last administration, a special exec at 12 noon on a Wednesday that nobody knew about in advance of it. There's certainly no publicity of it as far as I could see. I'm quite sure the documents had been put somewhere 4 days in advance or whatever was necessary, but nobody knew it was going to be happening at 12 noon on a Wednesday, and unheard of and unprecedented. So, and for a particular reason, there was a time, a very important time limit on the business that had to be conducted, I think. But nevertheless, it's not a. I would prefer if all executive meetings were known to be on a Tuesday at 7 o'clock or a quarter to 7 if we've got informal public questions first. The problem in the past, where you, Councillor Rubini, Chairman, you say that ex-Councillor Slyfield's system was successful. Yes, successful in getting people to come along and ask questions, but it became a trial of having to come and try and reword questions in a different manner to which they had been previously submitted on 2 or 3 significant issues where proper answers were not available. And to me, I absolutely 100% support the idea of having informal questions to council. I think that our executive members and leader and deputy leader and officers should be capable of pretty much answering any question that's put in front of them on the night about an issue. They should certainly know more about things than members of the public should, and they should be answering the questions. And the problem that I used to find was that the questions weren't being answered. I get a response, but that's not the same thing as an answer to the question, is it, Chairman, necessarily? And so, yes, I would absolutely 100% support this. I mean, the idea of what time are we going to start on a council meeting, I don't know that we started a quarter of an hour early in the past when we had informal meetings to the council. Did we, Councillor Goodridge? I think we still started at 7. It was just the exec that started a quarter of an hour early. Does Fiona remember?
It was before my time, but in the council. But I did find the report from June 2003 when informal questions were introduced, and it was before the council meeting in the same way as before executive.
I was the person doing the asking questions. I should be able to remember. I do apologise.
At least that was what was proposed.
That wasn't what was important to me at the time. As to what the time. It's just that obviously members.
I can confirm that we started earlier to take the questions.
Right. Well, I think if you've got members of the public, we must remember in everything we do that we are doing this for the public and for representing our residents. And I'm slightly disturbed that the idea that we shouldn't be doing this. No, we do anything that the public would want us to do and to make us more open and transparent. But the issue is whether or not it is an attractive or workable system, and that system, first of all, has to work for the residents, and has to work for us. It's an interaction, and certainly for the officers, of course, who are going to have to administer it in some form. We did change. I know I think it's a good idea to have 2 minutes rather than 4. We used to have a 4 minutes limit, and you were able to, or I was able to, I suppose, make a statement of things which were relevant, the background to the question, but which also informed members of things which they hadn't necessarily had written down in their papers in front of them, in the committee papers. So it was a tool for putting over information, whether that information was believed or not. It was still something that could be done. And obviously the question could be at the end of that 4 minutes, which was tiresome for people who didn't really want to listen to that particular subject anyway. And sometimes tiresome for the administration who didn't want certain things said in the chamber. 2 minutes was a lot better. The lady from Allfold found it less easy to produce a statement that didn't really have a question in it, and it certainly concentrates. Well, 2 minutes is half a side of paper. That should really be enough, as long as the background isn't, practically speaking, from the point of view of the public. If they're coming along here and they want to ask a question, you can't just come along and say to them, "Do you agree that?" Because you've got to tell them, you've got to give a good amount of information that's trying to make the question specific, so that you get the specific answer that you're looking for, so that you can't allow the council to just give some bland answer that looks like it answers the question but doesn't. And that was always the problem that we had with the East Street scheme, getting an answer. This is historic, so it's not a criticism of anybody who's here and present, obviously. But historically, these are the difficulties that we had, getting an answer, and then obviously, as history has proven, that often the answers that we weren't given weren't the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, to put it nicely.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I think
we've got the history. I've got lists and records of all of the things. 2 minutes, yes, but what we would need to do is have an accountable system whereby we know who had written and provided that answer, and where it was questionable, because if the information given in an answer is not to the satisfaction of the person and they want to question the veracity, we do need a system alongside the public question system that ensures the veracity of those answers can be questioned by a member or a member of the public and sorted out before a decision is made. That's the real issue here. It's the veracity of the responses that are given.
Thank you. Thank you. Fiona, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that I've been looking at a number of different councils' constitutions, particularly around the public speaking arrangements, and there's a great deal of variety. I even saw one yesterday that questions had to be 50 words or less, which when I then looked at the council agendas, people managed it. They were very concise but to the point questions. A wide variety of arrangements in terms of giving notice 4 days, sometimes even longer, a written response being provided before the meeting, but then the opportunity in the meeting for the questioner to ask a supplementary question of the executive member or committee chairman who responded. Some arrangements, you just give notice the day before of your question, and but all of them have the questions time within the body of the meeting. It's often time limited, maximum of 30 minutes, maximum of 20 minutes in some cases, but it does tend to be within the body of the meeting so that there is a formal record of that within the minutes. So as I think it was Councillor Adams was saying, it's important to recognise what the problem is that we're trying to solve with this, because there is a public speaking scheme, but it hasn't been used an awful lot recently.
Other questions? Councillor Goodrich.
Chairman, might I propose that we agree to amend PR10 to reintroduce formal questions at meetings of full council on the same basis as had been used in the past as a trial, and we see how it works, so that and the officers therefore prepare the necessary amendments we can talk about every different type of questions. I mean, we have formal questions, so and notice of those are given, and you get a written answer, and all those sort of things at full council. This is the sort of person that suddenly realises a calamity has occurred that day, or they suddenly thought about something, and at short notice want to come up with a question. So I think we should just reintroduce informal questions at meetings of full council on the same basis as was arranged previously, which was quarter of an hour before and a maximum of quarter of an hour.
Thank you. Councillor Marriott?
Thank you, Chairman. As a new member, for information, am I correct in assuming that both verbal and written questions receive a, what's the word here, a prepared answer?
Chairman, just as a point of order, this is confusing everybody because they're reading this as what happens on informals. I'm sure that's what Councillor Marriott's just done. We need to make quite clear this makes no reference to it whatsoever. So, no, they don't get prepared answers because they don't know what the question is.
Not on the day, but I'm assuming, I thought perhaps that when a question is raised by a member of the public in this chamber, then at the next council meeting, is it then they get a written report?
Okay, thanks. Officer, please.
Just to clarify on that, Chairman, so in the past when there's been informal questions, there's either been an answer given at the time, or sometimes the answer has been, we will write to you formally to respond to that. So it can be one or the other, or at least that's how it was done previously.
Yes, that's certainly my recollection of how we dealt with it. Kia? Any other? Hyman? Is it, as long as this is different to what you said earlier?
This is this is slightly difficult because at the last meeting that we had, council meeting that we had, I think it was a July meeting where informal questions to the executive was reintroduced, wasn't it? And in advance of that, I was concerned that the wording that had been used to do it, rather than simply reinstating how we used to do it back in 2012 or whatever was the last time we used, I can't remember even when it was, when the change was made. Rather than reinstate the wording from previous, some new wording had been put in, which I found rather confusing, and I thought, obviously it's got to be designed so that it's not confusing for residents. The suggestion that we are now going to say put back the wording we used to have, sort of successfully, but with 2 minutes instead of 4 minutes, after that change had been made. That will sort of clash with what was done last time at the last council meeting, because that used new wording. I think we also had virtually new names for it, because instead of having formal and informal, we had written and informal. Was a new system that we've got at the moment. We now have written and informal rather than formal and informal. And then it referred later to having a written question when actually, obviously, an informal question could be written down. So it became confusing in that, and I'd like to make sure that what we do end up with, I really do think we should have something, even if it's for us to convene, defer this meeting rather than conclude this meeting, defer this to meet again briefly in a week's time if we want to put this in before the October council meeting, with the wording in front of us that we are going to agree or not agree to, because I think to just say go away and write some stuff is not satisfactory for me. I would certainly want to have something in there which ensures the veracity, some way of ensuring the veracity, because it's a completely pointless process unless the public can be sure that they are going to get. I mean, we're talking about, obviously we want to be a beacon council, we want to be an excellent council. We've got to make sure that all the information that is given out and which we as members receive is accurate. We have to start ensuring the veracity of information, because that's a hole in our constitution at the moment. And this is obviously the place where we would do it, because if public are coming along and they want to ask questions, we have to ensure the veracity of the responses that they get from us. So I'd want that included, and I wouldn't want to...
Chairman, I had a proposal and a seconder, and it would be part of my proposal that the officers come back with the wording before it's finally approved.
Okay, that would make sense. Well, is it...
Seems that's quite acceptable by the officers. We can do one of two things. We can either reconvene in a week, or we can do it by email. And you can delegate, if you wish, that to the chairman and vice chairman to agree a form of words. Can I have any views on that?
I would suggest that we delegate it to the chairman and vice chairman of this meeting, or failing that, that we do it by email.
Given that I've made it perfectly clear that my view is that we have to ensure the veracity of the of responses, because it's pointless having a system if we're not going to ensure the veracity of the responses that are given, then I think it would have to be done by email so that we can ensure that wording is included, rather than to leave it to others who may not, because I wouldn't be able to vote for it, obviously, and unless there were further wording on top of what was there previously. I'm happy to have the old system, but with a system of questioning the veracity. Thank you. And I have some example wording with me.
You want to say something, Robin?
Jim, thank you. Just on the point of veracity, if officers are being asked to go away and draft some wording to cover that, I am not clear on what wording could go in to this rule or any rule to cover that point off, I'm afraid. So would need to have some clarity on what you're expecting.
Thank you. Councillor Knowles?
This seems to, since we proposed and seconded something, this seems to have moved to a different position, particularly with what Mr Taylor's just now said. And I'm wondering whether this whole thing should now be referred back to the executive so that they put forward the proper proposals in detail so we know what we're looking at. Because it seems to me that we're moving all the time and we're no longer sure what we're looking at and what is wanted. And I don't think we can just give a blank check. Well, I was quite happy until a couple of moments ago, but now the monitoring officer says he's not clear what he's meant to be doing, so that's not our fault. What has been put before us is incomplete. They should have put their proposals, and I wonder whether now it should be referred back and they should be told to put forward their proposals in the fullness of time.
Okay, Chairman, perfectly happy with what needs to be done in terms of drafting wording and that being delegated to the chairman and vice chairman. I was just making the point that in terms of the veracity, I don't see how that can be covered within the wording within a procedure rule, but I was just seeking any clarification from any members as to what they're expecting to see around that point, if anything.
Councillor Goodrich?
Chairman, if a member of the public asks a member of the executive for a question, it's somewhat implied that the answer you give is truthful. And to say, and the executive's answer will be truthful, I don't know how on a practical basis you can achieve that. I mean, it's daft. I would suggest that the wording is actually to the chairman and vice chairman. The matter is going to have to go to full council for approval anyway. So if any member of this committee or any other of the councillors feels that the wording is not as it ought to be, they can raise an amendment at full council. So it's not as if we're making the final decision. We're recommending to full council the wording should be. And I just think as a starting point, the wording should be as it was before. And it's the leader and deputy leader have asked it be reintroduced. Implies from that it should be reintroduced as it was before, which is implied there. Reintroduce means bring it back again. And it seems to me bring it back as it was is a good starter for 10.
I think I would accept that proposal, i.e. that we reintroduce the rules as it stood, and then when it goes to full council, if anybody disagrees with it, they can re-amend. However, what I would like to do is get on with it. We might as well have this trial, if that's what we want to call it. Suck it and see, whatever you want to say, let's get on with it and at least show and demonstrate that we are doing something rather than nothing. Any further questions? Otherwise, I'd like to take it to a vote. In that case, then I'd like to say item 2, questions by the public, to amend PR10 to reintroduce informal questions at meetings of full council, and that the wording be given to the Vice Chairman and Chairman to agree, and then taken to full council for any emendations. Is that accepting a vote on that, please? Don't know what's up with me tonight. I normally remember it. Voting, PR 17.7 states that any voting referred to in PR 17 may be conducted using any electronic voting systems available in the council chamber. Now, we have an available system, and I'm hoping we've arranged for a demonstration. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Is that acceptable to the members? Then we adjourn for 10 minutes, please, while we try the system.
Yes, that is, but has the system changed since it was
Again.
Mr. Chairman, I think the demonstration was very helpful. I have no problem in principle to using an electronic voting system, particularly in full council. What concerns me is how the members of public in particular can see what the result is. They can see it on a pie chart to see that 45% were in favour and 55% were against. But when you see the names listed, unless you've got extremely good eyesight, people in the public gallery will not be able to pick out the names on the screen. And I think until the IT system is such that that can be sorted, I'm loath to use it. The other point that was raised was that when the advantage of the electronic scheme, it can go on the webcast, so people can see it later and can see exactly how everybody voted. But we need to have a system whereby for every page of the webcast where you show how people voted, there is a resolution or amendment or at the top, so we can link the voting to the motion that was being proposed. So far as planning is concerned, I think it's important that the public can actually see how councillors vote, particularly on area committees. I would suggest that when you've got an area committee of 7 or 8 people, or 12 people at most, that by the time, I think you have to turn the microphones off, set up the voting system. By the time that's been done, we'd have done the vote already and got a result. So I'm not happy about it being at area planning. I'm prepared to be persuaded of joint planning, but I do feel that the public deserve to know straight away how their councillors have voted at full planning. And if they can't see on the screen how Councillor Goodridge voted for, against or abstained, I feel that they are getting less information than they've had previously. I accept that if you're going to have a voting system at full council which works, then that would replace a formal recorded vote. So that's fine. But as long as everybody can see, because in some councils, I was in the Parliament of Wales yesterday, they all have a screen in front of them, so everybody can see exactly what's going on, and they electronically vote on everything in the Senate in Cardiff. But they all have a screen. We don't. And bearing in mind some people's eyesight are worse than others, and we should not be discriminating against the disabled, I think we've got to have a system that works properly to see how people have voted and the public to see how people have voted before we use it.
Yes, thank you. Can I just comment on the fact that I believe strongly that you're right, Councillor Goodridge, we need to make sure that everybody can see how we vote. I think what I would like to see myself is a discussion with IT. There may be different ways to do it. In planning, then you're not going to get the numbers of councillors here. So if we say there's 9 or 10 persons on planning, that across the screen may well be visible, as opposed to what we're trying to do with a full council when we're talking a lot of names across the screen. So it may be possible to do it the other way. On full council, it may be, and again it's a matter of discussion, they had a red block for against and showed that first, and then the names of the councillors on abstention, and then the names of councillors for it. That way you would have less names up there and it may be more visible. I don't know, it needs further discussion. Other comments?
Thank you very much. Well, I have to say I agree with much that Councillor Goodridge has said. Thank you for arranging the the show so that we could see what happened. And I think my reaction is it's poor. It took a long time for anything to happen. And when it does happen, it's certainly on the downside of poor. When this system was used before, of course, it didn't work very well, but the names were much, much clearer. They were in big lists and it wasn't like this. Now, I am worried about just referring it to IT because we all know that IT people will say everything's wonderful no matter what, because that's their life, and they would just say, oh yes, it's fine. And it's for this to serve the council, not for the council to serve it. And I agree with Councillor Goodridge. I would not want to see this at area planning committees. The time it takes to sort it out and get it up on the screen, we'd be halfway through the next application. At last, as you know, you're chairman of the committee, vice chairman of the committee. At last, sudden, we had 4, and I think everyone was unanimous. It took about half a second for everybody to put their hand up. Finished, moved on. This is slow things down and looks very, very amateur and inefficient. And really, is that the way we want to portray this council?
Well, Councillor Knowles has basically said everything that I agree with. Yes, I think it was time before last we had about 6 items in Southern Planning, and they were very small, and everybody was able to make a decision relatively quickly. In fact, in much less time than it took actually to switch the system on. So it would just make the meetings much, much longer for no real purpose.
Thank you. Councillor Gray?
Thank you. I certainly would like to see IT or someone basically try to improve this. I think it's notable that everyone around this table, other than Fiona, actually is wearing glasses. But we could improve the contrast, and I'm sure there are potentially other ways they might be able to suggest. And I like the idea of electronic voting personally. I have one question on this, and it comes to me that if we're recording the names and the votes, but it's not a recorded vote, do we retain the records? And if we do, would we be subject to an FOI request for someone coming in and asking for who voted and what did they vote for? That's a question, general question on it.
So, Chairman, I would have to go and check that. My understanding is that it's only when we do a recorded vote that we have the data put on any sort of record as to how each individual member voted. But I would have to check that, and that's obviously important, probably since this system was first installed. Obviously, we have new data regulations to make sure we comply with. So we would absolutely go away and check that and make sure everything was in order.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman?
Thank you. Yeah, but I suppose to reverse that, to address that last point, we do have on every councillor's webpage, so when you go on and you look at your council, list of councillors, you go down and you find Councillor Jerry Hyman, whatever, and then there is voting record. There's a line there that says voting record, and I would naturally assume that this would be interfaced with that in some way. No. Fiona does not think so. Okay, so I would not think that that would be interfaceable at all in any way, because we are what we are. No, the issue here, I think, is accountability. If we're going to ensure that our councillors are accountable and we're going to ensure that members of the public are able to look and see how I, any other member of the council, voted on various issues, which you can do with your MPs and the rest, we should be looking to use a system like this in on every meaningful vote. But obviously, where you've got minutes of the meeting, interests, is that agreed? Agreed. You know, everybody, you do not want to have to delay the meeting. So it's only going to be for certain items, one would assume. And I think the minutes are, or the agenda for each meeting is going to have to identify which ones you vote on. Any substantive issue, you want to know how your representative voted on that. Now, at the moment, our system isn't very clever, and I think even this, I wouldn't be so damning as other members have been of this system, because I can read that. We weren't able to really read very well the the smaller screen that the public would have to have a look at. And so we could increase the font sizes, do something about that. In principle, I'm absolutely in favour of this, and I'm in principle in favour of having recorded vote. I don't think it has to take ages to do it. It has to be all vote now, you know, and whatever, this is what you're voting for. It would be clear to the public what people were voting for and what they weren't, if it was set up correctly. I think we should do it with virtually all issues. As I say, accountability does rely on all voting, on all matters being recorded, and then people being able to go and look at it. But if it won't interface with if we can't you know, tie it into voting records against each councillor on the website at the moment, I don't know how we'll do that. We need to be shown a fully functioning system before we agree to it, though. I absolutely agree with
Thank you,
Councillor
Councillor
Knowles.
Hyman. Yep. I'm just going to have a quick talk with the officers. Fiona would like to say a word.
A couple of points the point about if it's not a recorded vote, do we keep the names? With this system, we wouldn't have to. We can just show the pie chart that effectively gives the numbers of of voting in favour for the recommendation, against, and abstention. So that shows where the majority is. We don't have to print out the list of names, and it's not retained within the system. So all we would record in that case is the numbers and not the names who voted. On the point that Councillor Hyman raised, he spotted the voting record sort of tab on your councillor profiles. That was a feature of the latest release of ModGov. It doesn't automatically interlink with this system, because there are, of course, different types of voting system that councils can use, but it's not particularly onerous to add that information in the same way as we add the attendance records and declarations into ModGov. So it would actually, if we were having a recorded vote, and in the same way as we had the recorded votes at council 2 weeks ago, not only will we record those in the written minutes, but we will actually record those into that voting record tab in ModGov, so it will show up. So that we would be able to show that if it was a recorded vote.
Sorry, automatically or not? Because I'm looking at workload. If we have loads of votes on things, if every big decision is a vote, would it automatically link in or not?
Robin, clarify.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to clarify, points 3 and 4 within your papers address that. So there's the question of whether you want to use electronic voting routinely at full council and planning committee meetings. That's point 3. And then point 4 is whether you make all of those votes recorded votes, because the technology allows you to do that, so you've got a choice, but you don't have to do both. You could, for example, choose to start using electronic voting routinely in whatever committees you choose, but not change the rules around recorded votes. Or you could choose to change the rules around recorded votes. You don't have to bundle them together.
If I may.
Councillor Goodrich.
Chairman, I mean, I'm happy in principle with this voting system if it works. We've said there are things that are not good with it, and I think it needs to be deferred so that can be looked at. But we've got to remember that this system is not set up by our own IT department. This is a bespoke system that we've bought off the shelf, as I understand it. So it will very much depend whether the people who supplied this system are still in business and whether or not they do have tweaks they can make to it to cover the worries that we have. And in the meantime, I would suggest that training, because I think there's a training session 2 days' time, or in the next week anyway, there are training sessions on this electronic, which rather prejudges what we were going to be deciding, which doesn't please me a lot. But it seems to me we've got to have the system. I accept the system works, but it's not, when we're doing a recorded vote. I mean, I would not like to use electronic voting system to increase all the recorded votes that we all have. I mean, I'm not shy on when I vote. I mean, I'm quite happy. I put my hand up. Everyone can see I voted for something or against something. I can see at full council, instead of a recorded vote, it'd be jolly good to have electronic voting systems. So you can push a button, it'll save time. I would like to eliminate the idea of area planning, whatever happens, and be slightly sitting on the fence on joint planning. But I think we start by getting it working at full council and then progress it from there so that we agree. I would suggest that in principle we agree to electronic voting system at full council, but are concerned that if we had a recorded vote, the members of the public would not be able to see how individual councillors had voted. The current system, we all have to say yay, nay, or abstain. And I think we've got to get the system right first.
I would support that. What I would add is that I would like to see this deferred whilst the officers investigate how we improve the system, be it through the contractor, be it through our own IT system, and then come back to us with a report, because I do like the idea of the voting system, but we need proper hardware or IT to actually do it properly. And I don't think at this stage we're in that position.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, you said what I was going to say, actually. It's quite clear, if you're sitting out here, this system is not ready. It is not fit for purpose, and it needs to be deferred now, referred back, whatever we do, and come back as a new proposal with a working system. The slowness, the fact that the set-up time, the fact that you can't see the screen if you're in the gallery, and I too would not want area planning committees, because when there are objectors and supporters up there, Fiona did say at one point, well, so that we don't record all the names, it would just be a pie chart, so they wouldn't know how anybody voted. We should still be putting our hands up at an important meeting like that, so the people that have come here and made their objections or what support or whatever know. So this isn't ready, and I support that it should be deferred until it is.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman.
I support the motion that it be deferred, but I do think that local area planning committee meetings and joint planning committee meetings are ones where members of the public that we serve want to know how people have voted. And I think it's important that they're allowed to. We already have a system where people can, of course, say, can you record my vote against? Can you record my abstention? You know, the system we've got isn't entirely broken by any means. But if I cannot agree that we should not worry about doing it at planning meetings, because I think that's as important, if not more important, to most members of the public to know how how people voted on the planning decisions. So
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I think at first, hang on, Councillor Knowles. Thank you. I think at the moment what we want to do is to defer this decision until we get a working IT, and then any discussion about where we put it can follow from that. I must admit I favour myself starting with full council, and if we trial that for 1 or 2, see how it goes, and then transfer it to other committees as we see fit. But I agree we need a proper working system before we try anything. So unless there are any more questions, I'd like to make a proposal. So the proposal will be that we support electronic voting, but we need this system to be looked at by the officers to see whether improvements can be made to bring it up to a standard that is acceptable to this committee.
Chairman, ask that, and that it be brought back to this committee.
Yes. Yes, sorry, I thought I said that.
Can we have a recorded vote on this, please, using the...
If you want.
And possibly
It certainly seems appropriate to cancel any training because we don't want to train people into a system that doesn't work. Hang on.
Yeah, we absolutely can. I mean, just to make the slightly technical point, the Constitution at the moment allows any chair to choose to use electronic voting. That's not been our precedent for quite some time, so I don't think it's likely that any chair would suddenly decide to do that. But just to be clear, the proposals here were about whether or not it would become automatically used at particular committees. If any chair of a committee, including the mayor, decided they wanted to use electronic voting for any particular vote, they can do that. But none of that means we can't cancel the training that's in place.
Thank you. So on item 3 or 4, I've made that proposal. Can I have a seconder, please?
whole committee.
Take your pick. In that case, can we have a vote on it, please? Unanimous. There's no exclusion of press and public because there's nothing else further to discuss. So thank you very much for a healthy debate tonight. And I hope those people that weren't here tonight get well soon or whatever they're on. And I'll see you all at some point soon. Thank you.